First off, a big thank you to Roe versus Wade for taking our attention away from COVID and Omicron and the bacterial challenge we face. We have learnt from our past experiences with these invisible creatures that they have a very sinister way of pouncing upon us. They mutate, they change, they attack from various different formats. And so we can rest assured that either the bacteria itself or one of its cousins will be sure to attack us sometime in the future. But for now, our attention seems to be diverted towards something that is entirely of our own making, which is what happens to the human body. For some of us, this is a conversation that should take place outside the masjid. It does not concern us as Muslims. It is a concern of greater America. We should be focusing on the spiritual, on the confessional, on things like ibadah and so on. And there is some truth to that. The degree to which outside chatter, outside conversations impact us is hard to determine. We don't have cold statistics. We don't have the necessary data to determine the extent to which what happens outside affects what happens to us inside. And for those who are most exposed to this conversation, the sisters I speak of, we don't know what they think. We don't have much interaction with them. And therefore, we cannot surmise. But we do so nonetheless. So if I am to assume from the people seated in this masjid and those seated in other masajid outside, then I would say that we are strictly influenced by our own set of values and our own objectives. That the world outside us, the neighborhood in which we live, the people we work with, we go to school with, have little impact on our values, our morality, and our ethics. And you know as well as I do that this is just wishful thinking. This is just wishful thinking. The world outside us has as much impact on us, if not more, than the khutbahs that you listen to, the adhkar that you engage in, the duroos that you participate in. It creates a tussle within us. It creates a tussle within us. And we have to find ways of addressing that. It is not entirely a world that we are cut off from. And both Islam and common sense dictate that we pay attention to that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Anfal, there are actually two very important verses in Surah Al-Anfal that we ought to pay attention to with regard to this situation. In the first, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَاتَّقُوا فِتْلَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْكُمْ خَاصَّةً. And pay particular attention to such calamities as are not restricted strictly to those who engage in them. And two verses later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. You can hear the word fitna, right? It's the same word that repeats itself two verses earlier. And know that in your acquisition of your wealth and in your protection and nurturing of your children, there is much calamity. In the Arabic language, if a noun appears in the indefinite form, then it is sometimes known as an-nakiratu lit-tafkhim, so that it kind of amplifies the gravity of a particular situation, the importance of a particular instruction. So in this particular verse, the second one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that it is a fitna. It is not al-fitna. It is a calamity of several magnitudes. It's one thing for us to react to a fire that is started inside the masjid. I think it is fair and commonsensical to assume that every one of us will have a vested interest in extinguishing that fire. The same fire, when lit outside the precincts of this building, will garner perhaps less attention. And a fire on the street will be something that we would just be gawking at. Someone else's problem. But life cannot be divided up in such clean-cut ways. A fire inside, a fire next door, and a fire 2 steps away all have an impact on us. Some of that impact is direct, and some of it is indirect, and some remote. But ultimately, all these fires impact us. They have an effect on how we live our lives. And the second verse says they have the children that we are trying to protect will have an impact on our well-being as well. So we ought to look at these calamities as challenges and assume a positive attitude. As an opportunity to engage in da'wah, perhaps. Or an opportunity, excuse me, to at least understand the world, because it is complicated. This issue of Roe versus Wade, right? Has multiple dimensions to it. There's the legal. Will it be overturned or not? There is the moral. Is it right or is it wrong? There's the social. What impact will it have on us as people in this community? And of course, there's the Islamic. What does Islam have to say about this? So let us be clear that in all of these several dimensions, Islam certainly has a very clear, cogent response. It's not one I can share with you today. It's one that requires a seminar. So it's something that community might want to think about. An entire afternoon or perhaps an entire day dedicated to understanding the multiple dimensions of this particular issue. If we think this issue is as pertinent to us as it is to people outside. So that's something that we ought to think about and perhaps work on. But the answers that we provide, the alternative that Islam provides, is actually part of a cultural universe, our cultural universe, which is different from the cultural universe outside. Our priorities are not necessarily the priorities of society outside. And so we focus on A, while society focuses on B. And sometimes reconciliation is very hard to come by. On the surface, it seems like we all dress the same, we walk the same, we go to the same schools, we sit next to each other in the office. But in terms of our morality, our akhlaq, our ethics, our obligations, we are different. So we have a ruling with regard to abortion, We have a ruling with regard to fetal life. We have a ruling with regard to a woman and her right to her body. We have rulings with regard to that. But that is a secondary concern for us. For us, this is a symptom that points to a cause. For modern society, the symptom and the cause are the same. For modern society, the symptom and the cause are the same, or the cause is irrelevant. We are more concerned about this culture of promiscuity that gives rise to these unwanted babies or unwanted fetuses. And it speaks to a culture of promiscuity, excess, and extravagance that describes life in the modern world. We don't want to focus on ourselves. We want to find a quick solution to remove that which makes our own lives restricted, confined, and to provide that answer to the person next door, person who works in your office, your schoolmate, your neighbor, requires a great deal of diplomacy. It's one thing to say, we have the answer to this, and this is our answer. In most cases, it doesn't work that way. Nor can we absolve ourselves of our own problems. We don't know what to make about women and education, for instance. Should women be educated or should they not? Perhaps that question has been answered in America by the greater society outside. But you have an entire country in the East that has just passed a ruling preventing women from getting educated. And they're unwilling to listen to the fatwas of their own ulama, encouraging them, pleading with them that the women of Afghanistan should also be educated. So we have our own set of problems. Abortion, fetuses, women's rights are not a priority for us. But given that we live in this society, it is certainly an obligation upon us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ. You are the best of community, potentially. Through a process of evolution, you've been evolved into becoming the face of morality and ethics, enjoining that which is good and forbidding that which is wrong, but doing so with great wisdom. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. Invite unto the path of Allah. Provide an alternative to this particular perspective on abortion and Roe versus Wade, but do so with great wisdom. Your situation is different from his. My situation is different from his. So the hikmah that I apply in addressing the situation when talking to my neighbor, or talking to my own child, or talking to some person outside in the office will vary from person to person. But let's make this the overriding concern. We have a package to deliver. The outside of the package is as important as the inside. The outside of that package is as important as the inside. And only Allah can inspire us to do that. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam went on Mi'raj, the Mi'raj story is shared by most of us. We know the details of Mi'raj. We know about the travel from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis and then to the seventh heavens. We know things that, for instance, he met the Anbiya and he was shown heaven and hell. And then there was the discussion between him and Musa alayhi salam when he was given 50 salahs and how that was eventually reduced to 5 and so on. What we don't know is that when Rasulullah first shared his experience with the people of Mecca, he restricted his information to the journey from Mecca to Baytul Maqdis. Because the wisdom at that time dictated that he only share a snippet of what actually took place, which in itself was enormous. This small piece of information of that which was humanly impossible, of traveling in a mere few seconds or a few minutes and traversing a huge number of kilometers so quickly, was overwhelming. A large number of people who had previously believed apostatized. We have several examples in the life of the Prophet ﷺ where he was economical with the entire facts because the situation demanded it. So we have to determine when addressing our children how we present this argument. We have to educate ourselves. When we talk to our neighbors, how do we deal with it? It has multiple elements to it. It is a very important discussion. It is a window into their world. It is also a bridge into that world. Let's not close that window. Let's not fail, or let us not fail in crossing that bridge. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.